Alrighty, let's talk about our next topic here. We're talking about patriotism in America.
Good
It's
old America.
good old America. We're talking more specifically in Black America, right? We two Black individuals. So you know, if you're wondering by looking at my hair, I am mixed with Trinidadian and Black. So I'm half Black, but I've always considered myself Black. So that you know, because oftentimes I forget, and people look at me like you look pretty international. Are you sure you? I'm Black and Indian, but I've always considered Black and Trinidadian, but I've always considered myself Black, and that is what I put on my applications, if you were wondering. And I have my whole life. So let's talk about it, man. It's tough being a supporter in the country that we live in. For one, I think because of the freedom that we have.
Mhm.
Like I mentioned to you just a few seconds ago, I am mixed, and I have been to Trinidad and Tobago. And guess what? There is a strong patriotism in Trinidad and Tobago. There is a strong culture there, but it's because of the history. It's because of things that is done currently, and it's because also I think because of the, how do I say this, the freedoms that they do and do not have. I believe that America has the most freedom in the world to do whatever and say what there's more freedoms in America. So for one, I think that the reason we have such a democratic voice in today's society is because of the freedoms that we have. Now, two, I think that the Black voice in America and the Black patriotism in America, for our culture, for our country, has become very thinned out and very vaporized, in a sense, non-existent, because of our historical roots. And I think it's one of those things where it's hard for Blacks to really be patriotic. When I was playing sports, when I wrestled every Sunday, I got into the routine of saying the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And so it was one of those things where, and guess what? We all stood. I didn't think nothing, but guess what? There were times when I didn't stand, and so it was one of those things where it was just, everyone got quiet. But guess what? There were times when I didn't stand. There were times when I did stand. And sometimes I'd have my hand on my heart. Sometimes I didn't have my hand. But for the most part, it was there. I just did not, I was never able to embrace it like how I see my white brothers, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like I've always had a certain level of patriotism. It just always can get convoluted with thoughts at times because of history. And just a little more on that, it's hard. And so it's hard sometimes knowing that my white brothers have grandparents that have given them lots of lands and acres of land, and it's just some instances I have in my life. It's hard hearing my coworkers share with me that their wives inherited land from their grandparents, tillable land, profitable land that they could get money from. It's like a side hustle. It's hard to hear stories like that and know that, man, that could have been my ancestors who helped, create that land for you, that tillable land. And I don't have that land. And so in America, in this Black America that I feel I live in, it's hard to be super patriotic in knowing that there are certain things that are just still from old days that have trickled down, but then some real subtle, subliminal at times, biases and racism, racist activities that happen for me to just go full throttle with my patriotic behavior. What you think, Bradley?
Man, that was a mouthful. You spoke a lot. Patriotism is a very interesting conversation. For me, and you probably can relate, or maybe your experience is a little bit different, but being from South Side of Chicago, by all intents and purposes, the ghetto, I mean, ain't no patriotism in the hood like that. I mean, my mom is more of a patriot, I guess, more than most. Like, she'll actually, on like 4th of July and stuff like that, she'll actually put out a flag and junk. And she'll actually wear, the apparel and whatnot and things for America. And so patriotism is really interesting. So I had a little bit of a unique experience, but by and large, patriotism isn't emphasized in the hood. And that's what and not all black people are from the hood either, but by
Mhm.
and large, culturally speaking, there is a big difference in the experience that black Americans have. And as a result of that, there isn't, I mean, I think all, if not most at least, of black America would love to embrace this country and be like, the land of the free and the home of the brave, and put their hand on their heart to the anthem and do all of that thing. I think there's a desire to want that, but the dissonance I think that we face is we do not necessarily experience a lot of the values that we are told to represent as patriots. So our patriotism looks a little different. Our patriotism actually, in fact, serves as, and we just talked about with the previous topic, but accountability. We
Mhm.
focus less on espousing the values of America, but we focus more on holding America accountable to those very values. So if you call yourself the land of the free and the home of the brave, I don't believe they were saying that. I believe they were saying that even during slavery, land of the free, home of the brave. And if you're going to have these different values, if you're going to say we hold these truths self-evident that all men are created equally, then I think what most black Americans, men and women, strive for is to see that transpire in our lifetime, to see that transpire for our children. And that's what our desire is. So when we have apprehension, like, I mean, man, I know many people, like I just maybe over the last couple or few years, just finally started to proclaim and hold up the American flag, because I used to be like, in my mind, the American flag was symbolic of racism. It was a connection between being overly American and racist. So like
Mhm.
you never see me looking to a flag or holding up a flag and things like that. But I just recently started to embrace the fact that I'm an American, and how not proud of slavery, but very proud of the history of overcoming slavery. So I'm very proud of the inventions many black men and women have created, the accolades of black Americans. So I am a proud American. I am very patriotic of that, because I believe that we are foundational to this country, more foundational than most Americans, period, because a lot of people came here as immigrants. A
Mhm.
lot of our white population came in as immigrants. We know our Latino, a lot of them came in as immigrants. The only people that were here prior to us were Native Americans. So they are the only ones that are more foundational to this country than us. So when we talk about patriotism, those are just some of the things that have been coming to mind lately. And I guess my challenge would be to those that are really that really feel like they are patriotic about this country, understanding the difference. And this is where I think a lot of people like myself and others have been turned off from patriotism over the years, is people fuse together patriotism and nationalism. And that's where the issue comes, because
Oh,
patriotism,
okay. Explain the two in there. Explain that.
okay.
Explain that.
So when we think about patriotism, you know, being a patriot, meaning, standing up for this country. A lot of black people probably would view themselves as patriots, because they
Mhm.
do. The only reason why would you fight against racism if you didn't want something better for this country? It's not a selfish thing, it's a very selfless thing to fight against oppression, racism, evil. So I would argue a lot of black people are patriotic, but when we talk about nationalism, that's more of like a blind following of something. You're nationalistic to an idea to the point where it's like it doesn't matter what's happening. So a lot of people are patriotic and nationalistic, whereas black people aren't that nationalistic, because a lot of the nationalism of this country is rooted in a lot of bigotry, a lot of racism, a lot of other stuff we don't
And,
espouse.
and just to clarify, so like I think I think I understand what you say, because like the way I would explain it is, and just to share this for any
Sure.
of our white following that's listening to this, listen, you ought to understand that our Thanksgivings don't look like you all's Thanksgivings. Our Christmases don't look like you all's. We don't have white Santas. We don't have, and some of us do, a large majority of us do, but then you've got, black families that have black Santas, and
Yeah.
just, the different cultures that are being made up. And so it sounds like the nationalistic behavior that some people uphold to is only centered around things that are most close to them, instead of the actual a culmination of all of America.
Yeah, and
If that makes sense. And so like
yeah.
it's centered around what looks closest to them and not the entire body of America. And so yeah, I just wanted to
You put
clarify.
it exactly the way I was thinking it, but I couldn't verbalize. Yep. So when I think about nationalism, that's exactly what tends to be the issue. And it dives into a very close-minded perspective of what a patriot should be. And so we all would agree that anybody that's been in the army is a patriot. It's not even a question. It's not even a debate. If you fought in the army, and obviously if you didn't betray America, you're a patriot. It's that simple.
Right.
But a lot of times we don't view people who don't subscribe to certain things of this country as patriots. So, like, if I disagree with the national anthem, which originally had a lot of racist language in it, they actually had to cut the song, like, to cut 2/3, if not more, of the song out to actually make it not racist. But the original national anthem is a very racist song,
Wow.
if memory serves. So it wasn't as as, I guess, positive as it may seem now when you hear it when the Cowboys are playing or whatever your favorite football team is and they had a national anthem. But understanding that just because someone isn't as nationalistic as you or doesn't have the same view of the nation as you doesn't make them less of a patriot. It actually re-emphasizes them if you really get the nuance that is. Now, I'm not talking about your cultural Marxists. I'm not talking about your people who want to see this country destroyed or uprooted completely to the point where they want it to be a socialist country or they want it to be a communist type of country or they want to see every single thing destroyed. No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is having a level of empathy. My shirt says empathy over apathy. Having a
Mhm.
level of empathy for the experiences of an oppressed class of people who are trying to get on their own 2 feet and understanding that the way patriotism looks for them is going to be different than how it looks for the dominant society, which is by and large white, Eurocentric. So,
Mhm. Yeah, great points, man. I think I said Pledge of Allegiance earlier. I meant to say national anthem. So
national anthem.
yeah, thanks for
we
saying
did
that.
we did both growing up, so I mean, it feel like one and the same because you do them back to back.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough, and it's one of those things. It's tough, like because, and I'm just being super open here. Like, if almost in the black culture, if you're too patriotic, you're gonna get ridiculed. You're gonna, what do you
Yeah.
mean? What you doing? We're not
I
from
am a real American. Like, nah, that you're gonna get clowned. That ain't how this don't work.
here. Yeah, yeah, and some things in the black culture that we could clean up on, but we're
For
waiting.
sure.
And we're waiting on things to happen for us as well. We Black people, oh man, black folks are so laid back. We're so forgiving people, such forgiving people. We're so just so open, transparent. Like I don't understand why we are still talking about patriotism within the black community. It's hard for me because
Yeah.
look, this
We
is our
fought in all
country.
the wars.
Thank you. We fought in all, man. There's some things we didn't invented that we didn't get credit for. It's some things we didn't did that will never be spoken of in our history classes. Why aren't we taught? Okay, let me ask this question as well. I'm not gonna get too sidetracked. Why do we have a black? I've always struggled with this.
Mhm.
Why do we have a Black History Month? Right? I understand speaking to the historical roots, but if we were truly interwoven into this country, like how all of white America, let's just say that, how white America has, spoken
Yeah.
on, why do we only have 1 month when really it
Mhm.
should be, man, the blacks
Exactly.
folks, they didn't been here since the time, the start of this, the 13 colonies. So
Exactly.
why do we have 1 month? Really, this should be in our curriculums. We should be learning more about, notable black figures, and it
Yeah.
just be that, but I don't know.
It's a lot. You one of the biggest, like, we don't even acknowledge, like, one of the biggest revival in this country was led by an African American man and stuff. It's like a lot of things. Like, you can look in all 9 major areas of activity and you'll see a constant effort to stifle that. And to bring it back to, I think we've been flowing in a spiritual level with this anyway, but to really center it back to God and like the church is, as a church, we have to see past the enemy's tactics. We
Hmm.
have to be, we can't be ignorant of his devices. And so we're not putting blackness over a relationship with God or our
Because
identity as
that's an
Christians.
idol. Exactly.
Exactly. Blackness is an idol, but
Hmm.
we be foolish to ignore the realities as well. So like it'd be ignorant for me to just be like, I'm not black, I'm an American, and think that I'm going to get the exact same. I can hope for the exact same treatment of someone who isn't black, but if I'm ignorant of Satan's device, if I'm ignorant of these things, then I can't really help other people to see. Like I won't be able to help people who don't have the experiences that we've had to see what we deal with. There won't be room for empathy because there won't be room for conversations. I guarantee you, a lot of the Caucasian ministers that we've been able to interact with over the years about these things, they have a completely different view and perspective and level of empathy than they would have ever had if they had never came in contact. Because a lot of people, if we being real, man, we live in a country where people try to go as separate as they can from whatever they disagree with. It's a lot of echo chambers.
Hmm.
If CNN tell you something, you believe it. If Fox News tell you this, then you believe it. If Fox News tell you that these people are cultural Marxists, you immediately write them off instead of actually hearing what they have to say. So
Hmm.
all of that being said, from a spiritual perspective, this isn't to divide, but this is just to bring more awareness to the fact that yeah, black people are patriots too. It's not
Yep.
going to look nearly as acknowledging, especially from a group of people that still are trying and fighting to have their place. I mean, think about it. They're like, if you want to see change, vote. Well, there's voter suppression in some states directly geared toward African Americans to not vote. So there's still a lot of resistance, and we're still working to get that. Even the crime bill, which was put in place, like that affected African Americans. That's systematic racism put in policy. We can find policy. I think in the year 2000, Alabama made interracial marriage legal. Like what? In 2000?
See?
That means in our lifetime, you were, how old were you in 2000? I was
Man,
7.
Jesus, you youngin, man. You
You
a
were
young.
10. You were at least 10.
I was 10. I was 10 at the time. But
So yeah.
Bradley, you made mention of something that is just totally my okay. So okay, you made mention of you spit a bunch of gems. Now, this is going to be a conversation for another time, but let's talk about that 94 because like you mentioned, we listen
Mhm.
to both outlets as Christian as the body. I mean, me and Bradley are super, logical and pragmatic in our train of thought and in our worldviews. At the end of the day, the Bible is the final authority for our lives. So
For
yes,
sure.
we're talking about patriotism. Yes, we're talking about Black America. But look, first of all, let me say this: we're kingdom citizens first and foremost.
Yeah.
Because, like I mentioned earlier,
Facts.
blackness, whiteness, Hispanicness, that's just those things, when put on pedestals, are idols.
Yes.
We shouldn't be talking about color, but we are because of what happens, what has been
Yeah, the
transpiring in
reality.
our country today. So we must talk about it. But in the body of Christ, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, color was the last thing on their minds, right? They didn't have to talk. So we're kingdom citizens first and foremost. And then the second thing we should be talking about then is our nation, and not it's our nation, and how there should be a level of patriotism for our nation. We see in scripture
Exactly.
all the time the children of Israel. What is Israel? Israel's a nation, right? We hear the children of Israel was constantly
Come on.
fighting against the Egyptians. What is Egypt? A nation. So when put into that perspective, you realize, okay, God never designed it for us to be separate, but equal. But evil men created this, this rationale that, certain folks should be looked at as inferiors. And now here we are talking about color
Yeah.
and
Because they
patriotism.
use the Bible. A lot of it was done on the pedestal of morality. These people are less than humans. This is what the Bible says about servants and slaves. So you're not doing anything wrong. You're following the Bible. So they distorted the scriptures to their selfish gain.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a whole nother message, man.
But to your point, and so but back to the point. So with that being said, that's one thing. But you made another point about the crime bill. Now, because I like to hear both sides. And like I say, this is a conversation for another time. So if you're listening, please look, stay tuned for this because I want to talk
Yes.
about this as well. The idea of that crime bill was for drugs to get off the streets.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it affected a large majority of Black people in that time. Now, the whole conspiracy or the whole mindset of it was drugs. See, here's the thing. Here's why the conspiracy behind it is that the government sent drugs into the Black communities to kill them all
Yeah.
out, things of that nature. But now here is this crime bill that we're talking about, which unfortunately it was to get the drugs off the streets. It was to get evil people out of the streets. But unfortunately, it affected a large majority of Black folks. So, like I
Yeah,
say,
it's a deep conversation.
right.
We
But
could go into the side of it where they made a arbitrary uh basic decision that crack was worse than cocaine, so the time you get for doing crack was worse than cocaine because crack affected the Black communities, cocaine affected the white community. So it was like very arbitrary separation in like those things. Because if you had made it equal, if you had equally policed cocaine, then guess what?
it will be a lot of whites in prison too.
And guess what? They would have got rid of the crime bill much sooner. That thing would have been gone in less than a month because there was so many white people in jail based on that. If it was policed equally and if it were viewed as equal as crack. But and we know when white people get in trouble, stuff happening to white people, stuff happens real quick and changes, like with the opioid crisis.
Oh man, it's a huge deal. Why? Because of the powers that be, because of evil people coming to, into places of power and not including all of us.
That's why this conversation of patriotism is relevant because now you can see like, okay, I'm going to be a patriot to a country that does this to me, that has done this to people like me, that have affected. Because even if you didn't get affected by it in and of yourself, you can probably find a family member that was affected by the crime bill or by certain legislation specifically to target Black communities. So you can find somebody that was affected by laws from Ronald Reagan in the 80s. So it's a lot of different things, or the welfare things that were passed where for a family to get welfare, the father couldn't be in the household. Like we can go on and on things that were directly set up to sabotage our communities and things like that. And so when we talk about patriotism, the last thing someone like myself or Jeffton will want to hear is, if you don't like it, leave the country. What do you mean? It's like I'm getting a whooping, and I'm like, if you don't like it, you can get out of here. And you keep whooping me, or you keep on hurting me and causing pain. And so I'm no longer. And we don't desire to be victims, but if you're being victimized, I mean, hey, we got to call a spade a spade. Like, hey, I'm not trying to be a victim, but you got to acknowledge that you're doing some wrong.
Yeah, and I think the reason, because like I mentioned earlier, Trinidad, I would dare say even for mostly other countries, China, India, things like that. Well, if you don't like it, leave the country. That's their stance because of their history. There's always seemed to be, just the same groups of races in that country, and so it never would. It's not like America. America is obviously different because we're made up of so many different, historical, history, culture-driven types of people, and so we all have different cultures. We all have different histories that we bring to the table, and so it's one of those things. That's why I understand democracy and just allowing everyone to have a voice in including things. So
I love that. That's one of the W's that America does get is democracy. So there is a chance for change.
Exactly. Yeah, man. So I think this was very rich. Look, I mean, these things are tough to talk about. And I hope we've prefaced it as best as we can in reminding you, like, we honestly don't believe that these conversations should be talked about if things were to have happened correctly initially, right? If evil people didn't come about and start this color thing, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. But because they did, here we are, and we're still going through the consequences of these things, the trickling effects of these things that happened, yes, a long time ago. So yes, we need to talk about it.
Yeah, we're not making it up.
Thank you. Great talk, man. So